The opinions expressed are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the official positions of the sponsors, advertisers, or presenters. Advertising does not imply endorsement by the sponsors and presenters.
Hey guys, and welcome back to the Lighting Controls podcast. We have another fantastic guest for you today, but before we jump into the conversation, let me take a minute to remind everyone today's episode is presented by the LCA, the Lighting Controls Association, and also Light Fair. May 4th through 8th, Las Vegas. See you there.
This is also financially supported by the National Association of Innovative Lighting Distributors, or NAILD. Check out our website, lightingcontrolspodcast.com. Got a lot of information, episodes, as well as information on the NAILD Lighting Specialist and Controls certification. If you want to check out information on that, I highly recommend it. It should be a great opportunity for you to learn more about lighting controls and maybe take the next step in your career. But also huge shout out to our sponsor, which we could not do these episodes without. Today's sponsor is MW Connect. You can check them out at mwconnect.us. They've been in the industry for over 40 years. We had Margaret, who's the owner of the company, on the show talking about their humble beginnings in ballasts. And they've really kind of been in the know and aware of what's going on with this industry for so long that they really do provide an excellent solution for projects with lighting controls involved. It's an award-winning Bluetooth mesh technology that they leverage, and they even partner up with Kasambi and other groups to really make sure that their solutions are available in a wider audience range. So I really highly recommend you check it out if you're interested, mwconnect.us. But until then, let's get into the conversation. So today, our guest is Adrienne. Adrienne, do you mind just giving us a quick breakdown on who you are and what you do?
Sure. I'm Adrienne Jones. I have been in the lighting industry for almost 26 years this June. Most of that has been spent being a lighting rep. I did do a short stint as a distributor, but then I raced back to being a rep again. Primarily do design build work. So I love working in a team. Also Secretary of Wild International. I'm the finance leader for Wild Seattle chapter. I was on the IS board.
And just for people who aren't familiar with Wild, do you mind just giving the full initialism?
Oh, sure. Yeah. Women in Lighting and Design. So,
thank you.
And I do the mentorship program. You just had Sarah on not too long ago. So she leads that for us. Mm-hmm. Lots of stuff.
That's awesome. Well, thank you for joining us. And I really enjoy people from various backgrounds and various experiences onto this show because it really helps fill out this bigger picture when it comes to lighting controls. And, one of the things that stood out to me, which I feel like some people can kind of nod and agree with you and understand where you're coming from. But you said you had a brief stint in distribution and then sprung back into the sales rep. Is there something specific that came out of that? Or was it just sort of like, it wasn't for you?
Yeah, just wasn't for me. It was kind of the transition from, we still were stocking HID lamps and compact fluorescent and moving. And I was just more comfortable at that point with the standard bid process. The 2 o'clock heart attack. And yeah, that's what I always call it because it was 1:59. You're like,
I love that term.
Yeah.
No, and I think that that's a fair statement to refer to it as a 2 o'clock heart attack because like it is sort of like midday is when everything starts rushing in and you have to go.
Yeah, I feel like at 2:01 there should be some classical music that comes on, like to survive.
Oh, that's funny. But the other thing that you mentioned was design build, and I think one of the things that we haven't really talked a lot about on this show has been the difference between design bid build and design build. And if you don't mind just giving us a little peek behind the curtain on how design build procedures operate, because I feel like some people are clear on what it is and some people aren't clear on what it is.
Yeah, and sometimes you can get into the nuance. Like I remember looking up like ECCM, GCCM, there's all of these different variants of kind of the process and who has the liability at the end of the day. That's always kind of how I think about it. Is it the GC and his construction management person, it's CM group, which sometimes are in-house and they're the same group. But for me, I define it personally as a collaboration, a collaborative project where everybody's in the fold at the beginning. Yeah. So,
Yeah, because I mean, there's no
is.
bidding process separating
Right.
the contractors out. Your
Right.
design team and the contracting team can meet right then and there at the start.
Yes. Which is where I want to be. I always feel like, I've heard other conversations on this podcast, but everybody kind of has different things that they're good at, and they bleed into other disciplines or other roles. Like, we have a lot of distributors in Seattle who are very savvy with lighting controls, and they'll do some of their own design work. Obviously, lighting designers know architecture. Yeah, so it's nice to, I don't know, have input, I guess, at the beginning, because I could push this product and say, oh, no, like that's a $1 zillion fixture. Don't use that.
Yeah. So that's one of the things we talk of. It's one of the things we talk about so often is making sure you can get a seat at the table at the beginning, and how difficult that can be for some of these, right? We talk obviously to a lot of specifiers, a lot of designers, and they talk about how they don't necessarily get to meet with the owner and work through that process on projects that are designed going out to bid. So I guess sort of tell us a little bit more about how that really works and how that helps with the success of the project when you're on these design builds, when you are there the whole time with the owner and the contractors and you're working throughout the entire project.
Yeah, less so for me with the owner. It's more the electrical contractor. More often than not, a preferred distributor is brought in. Sometimes a lighting designer as well. And then I happen to marry somebody in the industry, and so we collab a lot. So he's usually on the team that I work on. And yeah, we do in-house photometrics. So a lot of it is going back and forth saying, here, this is what we think would work based on similar jobs that we might have done in the past. And then providing some rough budgets through channels. So that part of it still kind of stays the same. But it's just being, I guess the communication channels are really clear. Like, I send a submittal, and I'm going to know in 2 days whether that submittal is crap or not, right?
Right. Because you don't need to go through the formal channels to wait for that to get reviewed and responded to. You might just get a phone call like, hey, what the heck is this?
Yeah.
And so, what do you do if that is the case? I mean, have you ever had a situation where you've sent a submittal in and the person's like, what is this? Like, what do you do?
Oh, yeah. You think, oh, this is a pretty entrance. There's a foyer. Like, let's do some direct and indirect rings. And I'm like, no, that's fancy. Like, let's not do that. Like, oh, okay. Like, my fancy and somebody else's fancy is relative.
No, totally. And that is, I think, one of the interesting differences in the design build versus design bid build, because it's like design bid build, you need to like button everything up before you kick it out for bid. And so you have so much more documentation typically with design bid build. And then design build, it's like you sometimes get into shorthand. And so it's like, I don't want fancy. And it's like, well, what's your definition of fancy in this case? Yeah. So how do you navigate that kind of the nuances in that? Are there like questions that you usually ask at the outset with a new client that you haven't worked with before?
Yeah, a lot of them are kind of the repeats, a lot of the same. I understand what they're going to ask or what information I might not get and what assumptions I might make. But I'm also like CYA is my middle name. So I will, and I was an English major from my undergrad. So I will give you 20 pages of this is not included, or you need to add this, or I think this is what you're looking at. But
CYA stands for cover your assets.
Yes, that's the nicer way. Yeah, I know this is a good activity for me to modify my language choices. So
no, totally, and I think we all shorthand it for that reason. But CYA usually refers to like a note that is either the result of being burned by something, or you just don't want something to happen. So you say like, this absolutely must happen, or this cannot happen. And so by you saying CYA is your middle name means that you have a lot of CYA notes, I would imagine.
Yes. I would love to be called the Dalai Lama or Dr. DMX or something, but it's probably just Ms. CYA.
That's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
That is pretty amazing. I love it. So how do you handle? So do you specify controls as well, or strictly like the lighting design and fixtures?
I mean, that's been my goal. I think I talked to Webster too about this. Is really during COVID, I took an online class with our main controls manufacturer, and every time they would say something different, like, "Oh, you have this battery pack fixture, but you just have to make sure you have a non-switch hot, like unswitched hot coming to that fixture." And like, okay, pause, unswitched hot, like, da, 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 da. And then, actually, I keep a little notepad in the console of my car when I listen to your podcast in the morning if I'm driving. I think Ron said on another one, it's like opto splitter. And I'm like, opto splitter. Because you kind of move a little bit and then you're like, oh, okay, the syncing to ground or something. And I just like, okay. So I got really frustrated and I decided to make a very concerted effort to, I don't know, if here's, beginner, here's dangerous, and here's expert. I want to be somewhere about here-ish.
Yeah, in the expertise area, for sure.
Yes.
Well, I think that's really, for sure. And I mean, I'm flattered that you have a notebook that you break out for
that's
our
amazing.
podcast when we use terminology.
Don't tell the cops, but yeah.
The other thing to note there is that is the issue in our industry, is that we have so many definitions and the definitions don't always align. And in fact, you reached out to me a long time ago asking if there's like a resource that you can tap into that like defines some of these terms. And yeah, there's the IES LP 620, but it's not comprehensive. It doesn't go over every single term
I read
that
LP
you're going to run into. Yeah.
I'm excited for the new version.
Yeah. And so as a result, though, like even LP6's definitions don't always align with how some manufacturers utilize those terms. And so when you had reached out to me, that was sort of the impetus to our very first shorty, which was about definitions and terminology. And, there's just so much. Ron and I are actually also as the instructors for the LSC, are going through our list of definitions that we want to use for this. And it just keeps blowing into these rabbit holes where it's like, oh, if we say that, we need to define that. If we define that, we need to define that. And
are you guys all calling it the same thing? Are you saying power pack?
Exactly.
And you're saying road controller or,
Exactly. So those sorts of things are what we're trying to align on, because that, we're going to be instructing at the same time. But if I say power pack and I mean room controller and Ron says room controller, well, then people are learning two different things. And that is one of the real challenges of the educational of things within this industry. But from your
just
perspective,
the official stuff, but the nicknames too. Like we give cute little nicknames.
Right.
Like shoebox, people probably don't say that as much now for site lighting fixture, but they call them shovels now. We have bullhorns, we have bug eyes.
Oh yeah.
Cobra heads.
Yeah, so I kind of
acorns.
I feel bad for new people coming. I'm like, oh, you have to learn the proper vernacular, and then you have to learn all the cute silly names that we give things.
Well, and I think the other interesting challenge there is that with LED innovation, the form factors have kind of taken on a life of their own. So we're not dealing with the exact same form factors that we would traditionally. The reason why an acorn is the shape it is because you needed a mounting position, your metal halide or your high pressure sodium. But now with LEDs, they're just matching it to do the cutoff. Right. And so as a result, it looks like an acorn, but it's not really an acorn.
Doesn't need to be.
And right. And so I think from that perspective, looking at it from a lighting controls perspective, we kind of follow that same principle of following the form factor, but not really for the same purpose that originally. It's almost a chicken egg situation where it's like, yeah, this came first, so we have to follow that. But it doesn't make any logical sense without that historical context.
Right.
And so I think that might be part of the challenge here with these definitions is that from your perspective being, I would say you're probably, in the higher end of dangerous if you are categorizing yourself as dangerous, but you definitely are smarter than the average person when it comes to lighting control. So,
Thank you.
I think, sure.
I don't think you can, we
mean,
can't not do that anymore. There's no lighting person and lighting controls person anymore. We need to start thinking of that Venn diagram every morning that we get up, because if I pick a fixture and the contractor wants everything, embedded or enabled into the fixture, I have to make, different decisions. And if I can't accommodate that, like if it's a downlight, I always give my controls people a heads up saying, okay, you still need to include the sensor for this room. I can just put the smarts essentially.
And
but
how
the thing with
often
them, they're going to tell me.
Sure, sure. No, and how often do you have that happen where the person says, I want embedded controls? Because I feel like from the specification side, there's still a hesitancy to do embedded controls, whereas on the design, build, distribution to contractor sales point, there might be a bit more interest in that.
Yeah, I think more and more so, especially in like the last year. I feel like it was quite a slow incline on that. I'm not sure what the deal was. I worked on a job that had cross-laminated timber CLT. And so they don't want aux sensors on this beautiful wood ceiling.
Yeah.
So that was a big push to go put the controls devices and fixtures themselves.
As you start looking through, different sort of options, and I think you're right? That Venn diagram is a great way to define it, because not every lighting designer needs to be a controls designer, but there has to be some overlap so that they can allow the controls designers to do their job without having to go back to the design team and say, hey guys, this fixture isn't going to work now because you wanted X, Y, and Z, but you didn't specify a fixture that has the capability of doing this thing. So how, as you start looking at like integrated controls and what to pick for fixtures, who's sort of driving that? Are you driving that more by code based on the project you're working on, owners' sort of requirements? How are you sort of driving which way that goes, and what control protocols you look at as well?
Pretty much code and convenience. A lot of times I'll try and keep everything 0 to 10. It just makes it easier for the controls people. They love battery packs, obviously. Like I don't have to worry about emergency control devices. So obviously those are the questions that I ask at the beginning. Is it an inverter? Is it a generator by others? Is it a battery pack? Do you really want bug eyes everywhere? We can do this differently. Like those basic questions. But yeah, if I see a beautiful pennant as phase dim, sure, I'll put it in the project, but I definitely give a heads up, like there's going to be a different device for that. So again, that's a kind of another collaboration that goes within our company as well.
Right, because your company has basically like two entities. There's the lighting group, and then there's the controls group.
Right.
And
and we're lucky, one was an ex-architect. We kind of have a motley crew going on here. We have an ex-theater degree guy, master electrician. We have an architects. We have ex-manufacturer regionals.
So and you find that variety of background helps with you being able to kind of address different project requirements?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Different conversations that they've had with the specifiers to make sure, one, we're not stepping on any toes when it comes to that, but just really kind of to streamline the process, because I'm going to tell you up front, like this fixture is 10 to 12 weeks out. So more of the pragmatic parts of it, not just those things, but if we need to turn around this job, I wouldn't personally recommend And then we have tariffs, and we have this whole other
of course,
fun elements going on right now in the world. So it gets interesting.
But, so
more interesting up here.
I'm curious now, kind of jumping back to your ranking. I agree with you, by the way, of the way you've ranked people. There's like, beginner, dangerous, and expertise. And so, the way I interpret it is that you yourself in the dangerous category. Is that accurate?
Dangerous plus.
Okay.
I don't know.
But what do you think would get people like you from dangerous plus to expert? Like, what are we missing in this industry that needs to help people like you take that next step?
Well, I think obviously more, programs and courses or certifications like what you guys are doing. I would love to do the installation track for that. Just because I don't get to spend time with our field techs like out there troubleshooting. And I feel like if we share that information, do a better job, don't put maybe a wireless product right next to a bunch of metal lockers. Some of the frustrations that they see, making sure that those opinions get back so that we can communicate that on the front end.
Well, and I think that actually, I mean, it's great. I'm glad to hear that it's piqued your interest, and it's also interesting to hear the thought here, because the goal with the certification was to get people certified. But if people just want to kind of be like, take the course to understand that side of the industry, that would be interesting. So definitely something to think about. But the other thing that you mentioned is that two-way communication between the field service technicians and the sales reps. And I think that is something that we could do better in this industry of shoring up, because, we don't have that kind of direct communication. We were talking about this earlier in a previous episode where, the people out in the field aren't the same people who are reviewing the plans. And so as a result, the people out in the field are very skilled at what they do, but they're not actually part of that quotation process. Whereas the people who are part of the quotation process don't have that expertise of having put their hands on the equipment and seen all the ins and outs and the challenges. So how do we kind of shore that up? And I think training, absolutely. But, I wonder if there's another way that we could improve that two-way communication, or is there something that we could do to improve that?
Yeah, I think that's the struggle of all of us. I just did a bathroom remodel, and it made me contemplate, like, how does any building actually get done? Because just remodeling our bathroom in our house was like a nightmare. They show up and they're like, oh, we'll see you tomorrow. I'm like, oh, remember, you can only work these days. Well, nobody told me that. I'm like, this is day one. This is looking good. And then, we designed our own office. We bought a building that was an old church and gutted it. And seeing that process was really eye-opening for me, like seeing elevator permits and all these things that come down the pike that you're just struggling to get through. Communication is huge.
It is, but it's so tough, right? Like just between disciplines, it can be so difficult, right? Trying to get from the design team to the installing contractor and back and forth, during that process can be so difficult. I mean, just internally at my own company, we have a hard enough time sometimes getting information just back from our installers. Like, oh, hey, this didn't go so well on this site. And, if it's a struggle internally in our own organization, it's that much harder between multiple disciplines and people when you're removed, because, you have the advantage in the design build of working with the electrical contractor. So it's probably a little easier to get that feedback. But in that design bid build, you almost have no access to that contractor. So trying to get information from them after the fact can be very, very difficult. So the idea of taking the installer track and whether it's that or any other education anywhere is a great idea to just get some insight as to how do these things go? What trouble do you experience in the field? Because regardless of the system, like you mentioned, the wireless and the lockers, great point, right? We see that wireless with plaster lath and the horsehair and the metal, and you run into all sorts of issues too. Same thing. It doesn't matter whose system it is. You're going to likely have a problem if it's a wireless communication. So just being able to gather that sort of information from, field text, so you, as you look at the design, go, this probably isn't the best idea for this area. We should consider this or that. So, that would be such a good way. But how do we encourage people? It's very individual, I feel like, right? It's hard to say you need to go do this and get more education in these areas. It's a very individual thing, and you have that drive. And I think that's where I think a lot of people get stuck, is a lot of people never go from beginner to even dangerous. They start at beginner and they stick there and they think, I know enough, and the design team or the engineer is going to handle it, and that's good enough. And okay, well, we had an issue on this project, and so be it, and we're just going to move on and see what happens. So how do we get people to just take that leap from even just beginner to dangerous, or just get to beginner? Because there's a lot of people who don't even want to take that first step.
I think it's, I like guidelines. I like nice little organized linear paths to lighting. And, you see these videos like on YouTube all the time. If I could go back and learn Python again, I would do it this way, or, something like that. And like, that's great. But, if I could go back, I would, take more classes on electricity. I would, there was a great seminar that the IES used to do called Electricity for Lighting Practitioners. I don't think it's been updated since like 2011. That was very helpful. Networking. I was talking to Webster about this, like, well, on the job site, as long as we have an IP address going to the blah, blah, blah. Well, okay, what's an IP address? And there's other types of switches than just the ones that you touch on the wall, right? So when somebody says switch, they might not be talking about the same thing that you are. So it would be nice to have these, more like a better path with these background information, so that you're not, it's like learning a foreign language. I know Sarah, she stole my thunder and the analogies about foreign languages, but you do, because I learned French, and reading only gets to be fun after like a year, because you're stopping and like pulling out your dictionary. But once you have that core understanding, then I think it expedites the other part of the learning process.
Absolutely. And I think that does kind of hit on one of the real challenges with education that we don't do a good job of, which is teaching heuristics, tools for learning. We do a good job of reciting and regurgitating information, but we don't actually help people go, okay, if you run into this issue, this is the process that you want to follow to overcome this issue. And part of that is the definitional challenge, just in general. Like, if you run into a conversation with somebody who uses a term that you don't think is accurate, what do you do? And, for me personally, I get branded sometimes as a jerk, because I'll stop a conversation and say, we keep using this word. I don't agree on what this word means.
Yeah.
Can we please just go around and define what this means? And as soon as the first person says something, it's like, oh no, I didn't mean that. And it's like, okay, this is why we do this. But like that's sort of the core issue, is that we don't approach things with curiosity. And I think part of that is because of fear of being like pointed out and pulled out as like, oh, you're the person who's wrong, because we love finding people who are wrong. But I think the other thing is that because there's just so much inconsistency, it doesn't coalesce with that fear of being wrong. But I don't know, what's your perspective on that? Like, do you feel like, from your stance, are you getting into those conversations? Are you having definitional differences with like an owner or a contractor, and as a result, is that causing? Well, you mentioned, like, for instance, fancy, like
yeah,
that works.
Technical,
but like in the controls world, brightness. Interesting.
Brightness.
So what?
That's not a formal metric that I've ever seen, and I want to blaze it up. Okay, does that equal 50 candles? was at 58 foot candles. Yeah, same goes. I've had miscommunication as far as the control intent. Like, it's a dirty word. We actually printed T-shirts, or my husband did, for the controls team that said code minimum, because that you want to see some veins popping out of the forehead, you say code minimum.
And for people who
so
don't
you have 2 days
that
to do
term,
this. Yeah.
For people who don't hear that term, what is
the bare requirements required to comply with whatever codes, and that's another
energy codes.
Yeah. Oh, you're gonna get me going, Webster. This is the whole thing. Like, I want an app.
Please.
If this, like, I will make it if I have to. We have Washington State Energy Code and Seattle Energy Code, and obviously there's building codes and all sorts of other things. We also follow a lot of Title 24 because we love California. I just want some kind of app where I can say, here's the parameters, here's my job type. I'm not trying to make any extra bonus points on this. Tell me what are my requirements, because the language itself is so confusing to me. It shall not be less than I just want. Like, what did we do before ChatGPT?
Right.
Like, there shouldn't be stuff for interpretation. There shouldn't be an AHJ going out there and rejecting something or saying, well, I think it's this.
Yeah.
It should just be this.
Right. And so do you think that part of that is just because of the verbiage that's being used in the codes is too complex?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, and I went to two different controls people and said, what does this mean? And one gave me one answer and one gave me another.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is unfortunately the reality that we live in when it comes to these codes and standards, is that's, sometimes it's crystal clear. Sometimes it is absolutely like, yeah, okay, I get it. Like, this is what needs to happen. But then sometimes it's like, okay, but you have an exception, and inside that exception, you have a conditional requirement that then points back to an earlier part. And so it is kind of this weird map that you have to draw out. So, I agree. I think making things much more concise within the code would be good. And I mean, I'm sure the people who are listening to this who are on the councils are probably like, oh, really, guys? Like, we're already trying our best to make this concise. Yeah. But at the same time, it's like, yeah, but who are the readers? Who are the people who really rely on this information? I mean, code officials for sure, but even end users sometimes need to familiarize themselves with these terminology, with what's being stated in this document. So I think so a tool that takes the code minimum mindset and applies it to a project type. And then what gets spit out on the other end?
Everything. Well, I'd love to make that plus like the IESRPs, and I mean, that would be really exciting. Mostly like I think there's kind of two main ways that we go about it now, is just networking and LLC. And then, if you go LLC, you're going to be covered for 99% of the cases, but that's not always happening on the job. So it's more about, well, if you touch X amount of percent, I don't know, does anybody actually go out there and count and say, oh, I touched 12%, so I know I need to upgrade everything in the room? And maybe that's just because I'm not doing controls every day, but I look at it from a different perspective.
No, I think that actually, so I was actually talking to a code official in Minnesota recently who we were asking about like how they measure things, and they're just sort of like, it's not our job to measure that. It's like not like the foot candles, but it's like it's not our job to verify that lighting follows the egress path, because that's the architect's responsibility. And so there is sort of this weird finger pointing game that can go on between AHJs and the design team. But I think to your point though, to make things a lot cleaner, a lot clearer helps make those jobs a lot easier. And so maybe that finger pointing might disappear.
And again, I think it goes back to communication. Like we dealt with something on that where the path of egress came after controls drawings. Like, oh yeah, sorry, we forgot to send this to you.
Amazing.
And yeah, it was an important
And then
piece of information.
do you think the ambiguity in the code and sort of the runaround that you can get yourself into leads to these projects costing more because you're putting in a more complicated system than you maybe need on that given project just to meet what you believe is the code for that location?
Yeah, I think that's the controls version of CYA. They're going to add more than might be necessary just to make sure that it's covered too, dollar-wise, because we might have 2 price increases by the time they touch the next iteration. So they want to make sure we're not working backwards. But I would, if that was me and I didn't have competition, I'm sure I would be like,
yeah,
oh,
and that's tough. That's part of what we hear, right? Is sometimes we hear that these projects are too expensive, and in some cases, right, we don't necessarily have a clear view as to why do people think it's expensive. But I would be willing to bet, especially given certain locations where you've got the local AHJ who's referencing this code, but someone else was looking at this code and you're looking at that code. And so you just, like you said, you put in what you think you're going to need and you put in some CYA to make sure you're covered. And then usually the contractor pads a little extra CYA, and then this guy pads a little extra CYA. And the next thing you know, you've added an extra 15, 20 points to the project. And everyone wonders, why is the control so expensive? And I think, unfortunately, that is a big part of it, is there's so much sort of ambiguity to some of these things. And like you said, potential cost increases. And obviously what's happening now is with tariffs is making that even more difficult on people, unfortunately.
Yeah. I guess in getting proper direction, like an OPR, I don't recall understanding one. And I guess having a good understanding of what do they want. No, like some projects you get beautiful renderings of, SketchUp models showing the finishes and what we think that looks like. But I've never seen like the switches and a touch panel on those renderings. Right. It'd be nice to kind of incorporate because it's design. Controls is designed to. Yep. And to actually see what that looks like in the space.
I think that's a really good point too, because in our industry, we do kind of overlook the reality of how those devices interact with the architecture. Some groups don't even have custom finishes for things, or they don't even have optional colors for things. And so as a result, it's just sort of like, yeah, you're okay with what, right? It's like, that's a mahogany ceiling. Like, what?
Yeah.
Why would we put white on that? But to your point, it is an aesthetic impact. And I think one of the challenges here is if in SketchUp they actually had everything that was going to go into the space, you would have so much clutter and it wouldn't be that beautiful, elegant SketchUp model anymore. It would just be like, oh, okay, yeah, there's a smoke detector there, there's a sprinkler head there, there's, But to your point, it is an overlooked aspect of the lighting controls element that we don't think about the aesthetic impact of these devices in these spaces for the most part. So I think, we should absolutely have those conversations of like, okay, you're okay with a white keypad located right here, right? So we're almost out of time here, and so I'm going to try to combine all of this information into a nice little package.
I know, I'm like squirrel. Wait, let's talk about
that. No, Ron and I talk about this all the time. Like some people we just talk with and they just go. They just talk, which is great because we don't need to ask questions or needle through. But then there are people like you who are just like, oh, what about this? What about this? What about this? And they're both so much fun. We have so much fun on this show. But I mean, as far as things go from the rep's perspective, especially in a design build aspect, there is a benefit to the design build format because you have all of your team members right there talking, able to communicate, coordinate. The challenge there is that because it doesn't have as much a formal process, there's not as much documentation as there is in the design bid build process. So shorthand can be a slippery slope. You can make a statement that really isn't aligning with the person's expectations. And so, you really got to find ways of shoring up those, like, for instance, through a submittal process to make sure that everybody agrees, okay, yes, this is what we're doing. But it really does, again, boil down to communication. This is the trending term of the month, which is, how do we communicate? Can we be better about that? And I think, again, in our industry, we do such a disservice to people like you who want to know the correct answer, who need that procedural process to be able to do their job effectively. We don't have that. We don't really give guidance. And part of that is that the source of information is from the manufacturers, who have a variety of different definitions and terminologies. And so we're really kind of in the Wild West when it comes to definitional statements. And so, IES has done a really good job with the LP 620 to really try to narrow in on those definitions. But the downside to that is that there's a good number of groups out there that don't open up that document and don't read through it. And so, we need something that is a little bit more accessible, a little bit more bite-sized, that is sort of like, these are the core components. Once we agree on these components, fine, go run off with your definitions for other things. But we do still need to come to consensus on some of these things, and we don't do a good job of supporting that need. And so, hopefully, as we see these sorts of new standards coming out, like LLC really is in its heyday right now, hopefully the terms that support LLC are going to become much more complete and thorough and accurate and agreed upon, rather than these definitions that we have just kind of carried forward from, either the theater days that we were working in, or the residential world, or something. But, really is kind of to be seen if we're able to kind of stick that. But I think this is all really important information to kind of get feedback to the experts of this industry, because the experts of this industry are the ones who are supposed to be disseminating this information. And so people who listen to this podcast who already know all the terms that we're talking about, like, my question to them is, what are you doing to help educate people like Adrienne? So, that's kind of the takeaway that I have from this, which I think is a really important takeaway.
Yeah. I think you can't rely upon other people to teach you either. You have to be curious and stay curious. If you're not, I would suggest you pick a different industry to be involved in. If you want to just look at alphabet soup for a living, that's great, but I couldn't imagine. I just learned why there's 2 time delays on an aux sensor sometimes, and that was a good story, and now I'll never forget it.
Now, would you mind sharing the story that you heard to learn that?
Well, one tying the auxiliary to, like, the HVAC for the fan, and one for the actual light. So if you're in a bathroom, you might want the fan to stay on longer. And I'm like, once somebody told me that story, it stuck, Yeah. But you need to know the why, not just info.
Right. So, like people who learn the device functionality will go, yeah, it's got two time delay options. And
that's great.
People are just sort of like, okay, cool. And that person might not know the answer, which is
a funny answer.
So again, for sure. No, it's great. Cause you're right. If you let's look at a residential application here. You walk into your bathroom and the lights turn on and the fan turns on at the same time. You take a shower, you leave the bathroom. The lights might want to turn off first, and the fan still runs to dehumidify the space. So that's a perfect application of why you would want 2 different delays.
Yeah. Or a guy who sits and reads for 10 minutes in the bathroom. That might be
Yes.
There's not a guy listening that understands what you're talking about right now.
Yeah, I'm sure. No.
Adrienne, thank you so much. That was a fantastic conversation. Really appreciate your time. And it really does, remind everyone that there are a lot of definitions we need to work through, and there are a lot of definitions that owners use by default, like fancy, that don't actually mean anything in the real world, right? So there are things that we all need to work through as an industry. And you're right. You really have to stay curious because, like we talked about earlier, it really is the individual that drives to go from beginner to dangerous to expert. You're not going to find the average person does that. Like they do the code minimum, right? And they get in their lane and they stay there. And it's the people who are curious who really excel in their professions and in their industries, and can't advocate for that enough. And for people to do that and sort of, have that curiosity. Don't be afraid to fail. You're going to fail. We're not perfect. None of us are perfect. But it's learning from your failures so that you can be better and not make those same mistakes a second time. And then also being able to lean on other people, when things come up. If you have a question, knowing who to call, who to ask, and so that you don't have to go this alone. There are a lot of people out there who want to help. So thank you so much. Really appreciate your time. I will just close us out. Remind everyone, today's episode is presented by the LCA, the Lighting Controls Association, and Light Fair. Coming up the very beginning of May, just a few weeks from now, we will see you guys there.
And it's financially supported by the National Association of Innovative Lighting Distributors, or NAILD. Check out our website, lightingcontrolspodcast.com. Got all of our episodes, newsfeed, et cetera, and information about the NAILD LSC, which we did briefly talk about, which I'm super excited about. I think hopefully this is going to be part of that solution to this industry of helping identify these definitions and helping people understand. But also, huge shout out to our sponsor for this episode, which we could not do without. mwconnect.us is their website. You may know them as McWong, but they are now rebranded as MW Connect. Fantastic solution. They do have some excellent documentation if you're trying to learn about lighting controls. They have application guides and really good cut sheets. So I highly recommend that you check out their website, even if you aren't necessarily looking for a lighting control solution, but you want to learn more about lighting controls. They are really there to help. They've been in the industry for a very long time. They've won awards for their technology. They're really a good resource for you to tap into if you want to learn more. So check them out, mwconnect.us. But thank you so much for joining us. And Adrienne, again, thank you. This was an awesome conversation.